The bullet grazed past Falisade's ear, so close she felt the heat sear her skin. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The shock had stolen her voice, frozen her lungs, turned her blood to ice water. Lee Jun's hand clamped around her wrist like an iron shackle, yanking her sideways with such force her shoulder screamed in protest. They hit the marble floor together as another volley of gunfire shredded the air where her head had been milliseconds before. "Stay down." Lee Jun's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a blade. Falisade's heart hammered against her ribs, so hard she thought it might break through. Around them, the opulent rooftop party had descended into pandemonium. Seoul's elite were scrambling, screaming, diving behind overturned tables. Champagne flutes shattered across Italian marble. A woman in a designer gown stumbled past them, mascara streaming down her face. But how did we get here? How did a simple slap turn into this nightmare? The slap. It had been deafening in that dressing room. Falisade could still feel the sting in her palm, still see the shock that had rippled across Lee Jun's impossibly handsome face. His eyes had widened like a man who'd just been struck by lightning, like someone who'd forgotten what pain felt like. The other Korean women in the dressing room had frozen mid-movement, some with lipstick wands suspended in air, others with their phones already rising to capture what would become the viral moment of the century. 6 hours earlier, everything had been normal. Well, as normal as Seoul Fashion Week could be for a Nigerian designer trying to make her mark in a foreign country. Falisade had been adjusting the Ankara silk fusion dress she'd spent 3 months perfecting. The fabric was a masterpiece. Bold geometric patterns in purple and gold, traditional Nigerian Ankara woven with Korean silk in a way that honored both cultures without diminishing either. Her long braids, threaded with gold wire, cascaded down her back. She'd felt powerful. Ready. This was her moment. The other models had been chattering in rapid Korean, their excitement infectious even though Falisade only caught every third word. She'd been in Seoul for 6 months now, long enough to navigate the subway and order tteokbokki, but not long enough to follow conversations at full speed. Then the ceiling vent had crashed open. The man who'd dropped through it looked like he'd walked straight out of a runway show and into a war zone. His Armani suit was immaculate except for the dust coating his shoulders and what looked suspiciously like dark spatters on his collar. His long hair, the kind that made women write poetry, hung disheveled around a face that could have been carved from ice and sin. Tattoos snaked up his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. For a heartbeat, everyone had stared. Then Falisade's instincts had kicked in. Strange man. Women's dressing room. Dust and blood. Nothing about this was right. Her hand had connected with his face before conscious thought could stop her. The crack had echoed like a gunshot. Lee Jun had stood there, hand slowly rising to his reddening cheek, and for the first time in what Falisade would later learn was 8 years, someone had caught the most dangerous man in Seoul completely off guard. "You perverted piece of..." Falisade had started, her Nigerian accent thick with rage. "What kind of sick worker are you? You think you can just drop into women's dressing rooms like some boss? Boss." A tinny voice had crackled from somewhere on Lee Jun's person. "We heard impact. What's your status?" The room had fallen into a silence, so complete Falisade could hear her own heartbeat. Then the door had exploded inward. 3 men, dressed in black tactical gear, had stormed in with weapons drawn. But they weren't looking at Lee Jun. Their guns had swung toward the models, toward Falisade specifically, and in that crystalline moment she'd understood with perfect clarity that she was about to die. Lee Jun had moved like poetry written in violence. His elbow had caught the first attacker in the throat with a sickening crunch. The man had dropped, gasping, clawing at his crushed windpipe. The second attacker had tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Lee Jun had caught his wrist, twisted it backward with casual brutality, and used the man's own gun hand to shoot the third attacker in the kneecap. The sound had been deafening. The third man had crumpled, screaming. The first attacker, still struggling to breathe, had lurched forward and grabbed Falisade from behind. His arm had locked around her throat, cutting off her air. She'd clawed at him uselessly, panic flooding her system. Lee Jun's hand had shot out, fingers wrapping around Falisade's arm. He'd yanked her against his chest with such force the attacker's grip had broken instantly. She'd felt Lee Jun's heart beating against her back, steady as a metronome, while he'd snapped the attacker's wrist with his free hand. The man had crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. 8 seconds. 3 armed men, unconscious or incapacitated. 8 seconds. Falisade had been pressed against Lee Jun's chest, his arm still wrapped protectively around her waist. She'd tilted her head back and their eyes had met. His were dark, fathomless, burning with something she couldn't name. For a moment suspended outside time, neither of them had moved. Then Lee Jun had released her, stepped back, and smoothed his hair with one hand as if he'd just finished a particularly boring meeting rather than a fight for survival. "Sorry, ladies," he'd said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. Then he'd walked out, stepping over unconscious bodies like they were throw pillows. The room had erupted. "Oh my god, who was that?" One of the Korean models had grabbed her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "He looks like someone carved from ice." "Shut up," Palisade had snapped, her hands shaking so badly she'd had to clasp them together. "Men with guns just attacked us. Men with guns. And all you can think about is your Prince Charming?" Wait, wait. Another model had thrust her phone forward, screen glowing. "That's not just any guy. That's Lee Jun, the Lee Jun." Palisade had stared at the phone. The man on the screen was the same one she'd just slapped, but cleaned up, polished, devastating in a photo shoot for Door. His long hair had been styled to perfection, those neck tattoos on full display, his expression brooding and dangerous in a way that probably made marketing executives salivate. "He's the face of everything," the model had continued, scrolling frantically. "Dior, Chanel, Gucci. Every luxury brand in the world is fighting to have him. He's untouchable. He's the guy I just slapped," Palisade had whispered. The models had turned to her in unison, expressions ranging from awe to horror to barely suppressed glee. "You slapped Lee Jun," one had said slowly, as if testing the words. "You slapped Lee Jun." Someone had started recording. Within minutes, the video had been everywhere. Now, 6 hours later, Palisade was sprawled on a rooftop floor while that same impossibly beautiful, impossibly dangerous man shielded her body with his own as bullets carved through the night air. Lee Jun's hand was still locked around her wrist. Through the thin fabric of his suit jacket, she could feel the coiled muscle, the controlled power. He pulled her up in one smooth motion, his other hand drawing a gun from an ankle holster she hadn't known existed. "Can you run in those heels?" he asked, his tone conversational despite the chaos. Palisade looked down at her 6-inch stilettos. The Ankara silk fusion gown she'd worn to this cursed party suddenly felt like a death sentence. "I can run in anything," she lied. Lee Jun's lips quirked, just barely. "Good. Because we're about to find out." He moved, and she moved with him, their bodies synchronized in a way that should have been impossible for two people who'd met hours ago. They sprinted toward the rooftop edge while gunfire chased them, sparks flying where bullets struck metal railings. A helicopter searchlight suddenly flooded the rooftop, turning night into artificial day. Palisade threw up her hand against the blinding glare. "Jump!" Lee Jun shouted. "What?" Palisade skidded to a stop at the edge. Below them was a 15-foot gap to the next building. 15 feet of empty solaire with the street a lethal distance below. "Trust me." Lee Jun's arm wrapped around her waist. "I don't even know you." He jumped, pulling her with him. For a heartbeat, they were airborne. Palisade's scream caught in her throat. The wind whipped her braids backward. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. Lee Jun's arm was iron around her waist, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. They hit the adjacent rooftop hard, rolling across concrete. Palisade's dress tore, skin scraping raw, but they were alive. They were. "Boss." A voice crackled in Lee Jun's ear, loud enough that Palisade could hear it. "Boss, it's a full assault. 30 operatives, maybe more. Someone leaked your location." Lee Jun dragged Palisade to her feet, already moving toward the fire escape. "How many are ours?" "Just me and Jean at the perimeter. Everyone else is 3 minutes out." 3 minutes is a lifetime. Lee Jun's jaw clenched. "Get to extraction point Omega. We'll meet you there." They clattered down the fire escape, Palisade's heels ringing against metal. Her mind was reeling, trying to process everything, failing spectacularly. They hit the alley running. Lee Jun's hand found hers again, pulling her through the darkness between Seoul's glittering buildings. Behind them, shouts in multiple languages, Korean, Mandarin, something else Palisade couldn't identify, echoed off concrete walls. "Here." Lee Jun skidded to a stop beside a motorcycle parked in the shadows. Not just any motorcycle, a Ducati Panigale, sleek and black and probably worth more than Palisade's entire year's salary. "You're joking," Palisade panted. "We're escaping on a motorcycle? In evening wear?" Lee Jun was already swinging his leg over, hands moving with practiced efficiency across the controls. "Would you prefer to discuss transportation options with the people shooting at us?" "Fair point." The engine roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder. Lee Jun looked back at her, and even in the dim alley light, His eyes were intense enough to steal breath. Get on. Hold tight. Don't let go no matter what happens. Palisade hiked up her ruined gown and climbed on behind him. Her arms wrapped around his waist, and she felt the solid warmth of him, the controlled strength. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that somehow survived gunfights and rooftop escapes. Ready? He asked. Not even. He gunned it. The motorcycle shot forward like a bullet. Palisade's scream was lost in the engine's roar and the rush of wind. They burst out of the alley into Seoul's nighttime traffic, weaving between cars with a recklessness that should have been illegal. Probably was illegal. Behind them, headlights flared. 2 black SUVs, maybe 3, were giving chase. Lee Jun took a corner so sharp Palisade felt the bike tilting, her knee nearly scraping asphalt. She pressed herself against his back, arms locked around him like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Who are these people? She shouted over the wind. Crimson Lotus. Lee Jun shouted back. Chinese-Korean triad. Very angry. Very armed. Why are they shooting at us? Long story. They rocketed through Dongdaemun, the massive shopping district a blur of neon and steel. Pedestrians scattered. Horns blared. An SUV pulled alongside them, window rolling down, gun barrel emerging. Lee Jun didn't hesitate. He twisted the throttle, the Ducati surging forward with a scream of pure speed. They shot through a gap between 2 buses that couldn't have been more than 6 inches wider than the bike itself. The SUV tried to follow and clipped a bus's bumper, spinning out in a shower of sparks. One down. Lee Jun's voice carried a note of dark satisfaction. They plunged into the labyrinthine maze of Dongdaemun Market, the motorcycle weaving through narrow passages between vendor stalls. Fabric samples fluttered in their wake. A tower of cardboard boxes exploded as they grazed it. Palisade caught a glimpse of a vendor's shocked face, mouth hanging open. The remaining SUVs were too wide to follow. Their engines growled in frustration from the market's entrance. Lee Jun didn't slow down until they'd emerged on the other side and put 3 more blocks between them and pursuit. Finally, he guided the Ducati into an abandoned warehouse district, killing the engine in the shadow of a building that looked like it hadn't been occupied since the 90s. Silence crashed over them like a wave. Palisade's hands were shaking as she climbed off the bike. Her legs felt like water. Her heart was trying to escape through her throat. She took 2 steps, turned, and faced Lee Jun. What the hell was that? Lee Jun swung off the motorcycle with fluid grace, running a hand through his windswept hair. Even after a gunfight and a high-speed chase, he looked like he could walk back onto a runway. It was infuriating. That, he said calmly, was the Crimson Lotus triad attempting to kill us both. I got that part. Palisade's voice climbed. What I don't understand is why. I'm a fashion designer. I make dresses. People don't shoot at people who make dresses. They do when those people are connected to Chief Ademola Adeyemi. The world stopped. Palisade stared at Lee Jun, her father's name hanging in the air between them like smoke. How do you know my father's name? Lee Jun's expression shifted, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Because your father and I. Headlights flooded the warehouse. Palisade's heart, which had just started to slow, kicked back into overdrive. Lee Jun's hand went to his gun, body tensing for another fight. But the vehicles rolling toward them weren't black SUVs. They were armored sedans, and as they stopped in a defensive perimeter around the warehouse, men and women in tactical gear emerged. They moved with military precision, weapons drawn but pointed down. Boss. A man jogged forward, lean and sharp-featured, maybe 30. We've secured the perimeter. No Crimson Lotus in a 3-block radius. Lee Jun relaxed fractionally. Casualties? Jean took a graze on his shoulder. Nothing serious. Everyone else clean. The man's gaze slid to Palisade, curiosity evident. This is her? Minho, meet Palisade Adeyemi. Lee Jun's voice was carefully neutral. Miss Adeyemi, this is Kong Minho, my second in command. Palisade looked between them, her mind struggling to piece together a reality that made sense. Second in command of what, exactly? Your modeling agency? Minho laughed, the sound sharp and bright. Oh, I like her. She's funny. She's also confused and probably traumatized, Lee Jun said. Get us to the Kongwon safe house. Full security protocol. And Minho, find out how the Crimson Lotus knew I'd be at that party. Someone talked. Minho's expression hardened. On it, boss. Within minutes, Palisade found herself in the back of an armored sedan, Lee Jun beside her. The interior was all black leather and tinted windows. A privacy screen separated them from the driver. As they pulled onto the highway heading out of Seoul, reality finally crashed over Palisade like a cold wave. Her hands started shaking again. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving exhaustion and shock in its wake. Hey. Lee Jun's voice was softer than she'd heard it. You're okay. Breathe. Breathe? Palisade's laugh came out broken. Men just tried to kill me. On a rooftop. After I went to a party I didn't even want to attend because some stranger called me and said my father's legacy depended on it, which makes no sense because my father was a businessman who died in a car accident 3 years ago, except apparently you know something about that, and I can't. She was hyperventilating. The sedan's interior suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Lee Jun reached across the space between them. His hand, the same hand that had pulled triggers and snapped wrists with casual brutality, settled on her shoulder with surprising gentleness. Look at me, he said. Palisade. Look at me. She did. His eyes were dark and steady, anchoring her. In through your nose, he instructed. Hold for 4 seconds. Out through your mouth. With me. In. They breathed together. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Once. Twice. 5 times. 10. Slowly, Palisade's heart rate settled. The world stopped tilting. Better? Lee Jun asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. He didn't move his hand from her shoulder. Now I'm going to tell you some things. They're going to be hard to hear. But I need you to stay calm because we have about an hour's drive ahead of us and I need you functional when we arrive. Can you do that? Can I? Palisade almost laughed again. I just survived an assassination attempt on a motorcycle in 6-inch heels. I think I can handle some information. The corner of Lee Jun's mouth lifted. That's the spirit. He settled back against the leather seat, finally removing his hand from her shoulder. Palisade found herself missing the warmth. Your father, Lee Jun began, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the tinted windows, was not just a businessman. Chief Ademola Adeyemi was one of the most brilliant smugglers I've ever known. The words landed like physical blows. No, my father he owned textile factories. Import-export. Legitimate business. He did own textile factories. Very successful ones. They were also perfect cover for moving conflict diamonds and rare fabrics through Nigerian ports. Lee Jun's voice was matter-of-fact, neither condemning nor defending. He worked with an organization called the White Dragon Syndicate. We handle high-value acquisitions and strategic distribution across 3 continents. We? Palisade's voice came out strangled. You're part of this crime organization? I run it. The sedan hummed along the highway. Seoul's lights were fading behind them, replaced by darkness and the occasional glow of small towns. You're insane, Palisade said finally. This whole night is insane. You're telling me my father who taught me to read, who took me to church every Sunday, who cried at my university graduation, was a criminal? Your father was a lot of things. Lee Jun turned to look at her directly. Criminal, yes, but also a man trying to build a better life for his daughter. Everything he did, every risk he took, was for you. Don't. Palisade's voice cracked. Don't you dare try to make this noble. If what you're saying is true, he lied to me. My entire life was a lie. Your father loved you. That was never a lie. How would you even know? You said you knew him, but Chief Ademola saved my life when I was 19 years old. Lee Jun's gaze went distant, remembering. I was nobody. A street kid in Seoul with a talent for fighting and nothing to lose. Your father was in Korea for a textile deal, and he saw me take down 5 men who tried to rob him. He asked me one question. Do you want to survive or do you want to live? I chose to live. He took me in, trained me, taught me everything about the business. When he went back to Lagos, I stayed in Seoul and built the White Dragon Syndicate from the ground up. Palisade processed this, her mind reeling. So you were like, what? His protege? More like the son he never had. Lee Jun's expression was unreadable. He talked about you constantly. My brilliant Palisade. She's going to change the world with her designs. He was so proud of you. Tears burned behind Palisade's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. If he cared so much, why did he die in a car accident and leave me alone? Because it wasn't an accident. The sedan made a turn, tires humming on smooth asphalt. Through the windows, Palisade could see they were entering more mountainous terrain. Lee Jun continued, his voice hard. 3 years ago, your father wanted out. He'd made enough money, built enough legitimate businesses. He wanted to retire, disappear, spend his remaining years watching you build your fashion empire. But when you're in as deep as Chief Ademola was, You don't just walk away. The Crimson Lotus Triad, our biggest rivals, couldn't allow it. He knew too much. Had too much leverage. Palisade's throat felt tight. So they killed him. Car bomb. Lagos traffic, 3rd mainland bridge. They made it look like an accident, but I knew. Lee Jun's hands clenched into fists. I was supposed to be there that day. Your father and I had a meeting scheduled. He called me that morning, told me to stay in Seoul. That something felt wrong. 2 hours later, he was dead. The sedan climbed higher into the mountains. The temperature was dropping. Palisade could feel it even through the vehicle's climate control. Why didn't they come after you? She asked quietly. They tried. For 2 years, the Crimson Lotus and the White Dragon Syndicate have been locked in a shadow war. Assassinations, sabotage, territorial disputes. It's been, he paused, searching for the word. Expensive. But what does any of this have to do with me? I'm not part of your world. I make dresses. I went to design school in London. I've never even gotten a parking ticket. Lee Jun turned to face her fully. Before your father died, he created insurance. A ledger containing every transaction, every name, every dirty secret of both organizations. Politicians we've paid off. Routes we use. Warehouse locations. Bank accounts. Everything. If that ledger goes public, it destroys both the White Dragon and the Crimson Lotus completely. Understanding hit Palisade like ice water. And they think I have it. Your father's last communication to me was cryptic.